hi everyone. I'm Peter DiCola. I'm the former research director of Future Music Coalition. I'm now a law professor at Northwestern University. I teach copyright law. I teach a seminar on the music industry. Oh, good. Let's huddle together. That's good.
Feeling very team.
So this panel is titled "Monsters of Data," and we have. I think it's monsters of data, but it's also monsters of people who have to use data or think about how data is used, think about the social and cultural effects of that data, and let's get started. Okay, first let me start with Tim. Let's just have everyone introduce themselves. Tim.
I'm Tim.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for your cooperation with that. Eric.
I wish I were half of Too Much Joy. I'm not. My name's Eric Garland, and I started an online media metrics company called BigChampagne 11 years ago. And this year we started a new platform called ultimatechart.com, trying to change the way music is measured, because it's what is measured that really matters.
And my name is Danah Boyd, and I'm a senior researcher at Microsoft Research, and a research associate at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society, which is a long-winded way of saying that I spend a lot of time researching what happens with social media and new technologies, mostly actually focused on teenagers and how they use technology. And years ago, I actually worked at Yahoo Music, which is where I started getting interested in questions of data and music activities, and spent a lot of time actually talking to teenagers about music as it hits with their uses of social media.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. My name is Erin McKeown. I am a musician, a writer, and a producer, and this year I'm celebrating 10 years since my first record came out.
Wow, congratulations, Erin. Okay, so first let's start with the premise of the panel. There's an enormous amount of data that's available that's being collected as things have been digitized and more and more computers are networked with more and more bandwidth. So Tim, give us some perspective. Tim, you worked at Rhapsody, you worked at listen.com before that. What kinds of data are available that are most interesting to you, that are most relevant to musicians and how they do their jobs?
Okay, well, I'll start with what was interesting to me running the programming team at Rhapsody, which is basically a way of, our job was to, sort of the spiel I gave the programming team, which we used to call editorial, and then we stopped calling it editorial because we didn't spend any time typing. But a lot of these people were coming from, the old rock critic world where they were working at alternative weeklies and they thought their job was to tell people what was cool and what sucked. And in the 21st century, that's not your job anymore if you're in that sort of cultural space. There's no more tastemakers or gatekeepers. So like at Rhapsody, our job was we were park rangers. There was this musical jungle. We couldn't stop it from being out there. We couldn't stop people from getting to what they wanted. Our job was just to like bushwhack trails through the jungle and make it easier for people to get to the music they were going to like. So it was a much more humble endeavor. And so our job was basically to figure out what people were liking. So something like Owl City, we saw that, our electronic editor saw that rising in the charts. There was nobody pushing it at the time. It was happening despite, gatekeepers and cultural critics. So we tried to keep our finger on what people were listening to and trying to figure out why. And one of the metrics that we used that I was pushing the labels. I was like, you guys got to start paying attention to this. It was basically every month we knew exactly how many times every artist in the system was played and by how many people. So knowing who was number one was semi-important, but more importantly was knowing how many times the same person was listening to the same artist over and over again. Because in the 21st century, when you're moving away from music as a product and toward music as a service, the old charts, and I'm sure Eric will get into this a lot, the ways we used to measure success don't really apply anymore. We used to have airplay charts, which told you, what was being broadcast at people. And then there were sales charts that were sort of a subset of the airplay charts. And it's like, okay, of all the stuff people were fed, what did they actually swallow? And in the 21st century, we've got this new set of charts, which is usage charts. It's what actually gets played of all the stuff that's out there, what gets returned to and used over and over again. So what really makes me sort of optimistic about the future being a guy who's always liked semi-popular music, is that there's two ways of making the same amount of money in the 21st century. You can be a Lady Gaga type artist that has 10 million people listen to you a couple of times, or you can be, say, like a Yo La Tengo style artist that has a much smaller number of fans, but those fans play you over and over and over again. And when you're living in a usage-based economy, there didn't used to be economic rewards for being liked a lot by a few people. Now there are. That's my spiel.
Thanks, Tim. Same question for you, Eric. What kinds of data are available based on what you're collecting and the information that you've got over at BigChampagne? What kinds of data are now available that say weren't 10 years ago when Future Music Coalition started?
I think we have much more interesting conversations now around definitions of success, because let's face it, the traditional charts were not so much a measure of success as they were a measure of financial success, and for a handful of companies. And we're all familiar, I won't go on with all the tales of people actually spending more money to game the charts than they could possibly earn back through being atop the charts, where you actually lost sight of the entire purpose, which was to build a business that was profitable, all in service of just being number one. And I think now, for the most part, when we talk about success, we have a much more wide-ranging discussion about artistic fulfillment and about earning a living and about, yes, absolutely, about financial success, but more importantly, about creating a lasting relationship with an audience that can sustain over time. And so I think what data, and I liked the word monster and data being in the title, because I think data sometimes is this monster that threatens to swallow us all up. And really, what's most interesting to me, and where we've spent most of our focus for a lot of years now, is on the conversation between artists and their fans, and respecting audiences for the first time. I mean, really, as far as mass media is concerned, we do not have a great track record for respecting audiences. We throw it out there and you better eat it up, because if you don't, we're going to make something worse and throw it out there even harder. And I think now, for the first time, we have this begrudging respect, not begrudging on the part of an artist. I mean, Erin, you can talk about this, about how little things have changed in that regard. Artists have always just wanted to super serve their fans and make them happy and make them stay in love. But the traditional infrastructure has never had a great deal of respect. And even now that economic reality is forcing them to listen and to respect an audience, they really hate it. These institutions go to work every day thinking, oh, if the fans didn't have so much power, we would have a much better time. And I think that in terms of metrics, I'm less interested in the billions of points of data, the things that can theoretically and actually be collected, and much more interested in the application of those things, in listening to an audience, respecting what that audience is asking for, and giving them something that meets or exceeds that expectation.
Well, I want to go to Erin. I'm going to jump over Dan, and Dana, feel free to jump in whenever. But Erin, you yesterday at the panels, we heard a lot of the panels, the sort of super topic, at least as I experienced it, was like how to market yourself as a musician. It was a lot about marketing. Even we had a data panel yesterday that was really interesting, but a lot of it was about marketing, how to use social media, how to use those things. So jumping off what Eric said about applying these billions of points of data, or applying any of that information, like what are you thinking as you hear about the billions of points of data that are available and how you would use them? How do you react?
I react with suspicion and ambivalence. to be totally honest, and I think. I think we had a fairly spirited talk before we got out here, which we tried to tame so we could bring it out here. But I'm still kind of filled with reverb about. Hello. I'm filled with some reverb from that talk, but I think what came up yesterday was a question of authenticity and transparency in terms of like the artist as entrepreneur. Like that's essentially what this information is being called up for, being used for. What are we doing with it? And by doing, how are we paying rent with it? And how much do I, as an artist, talk about that, even though I'm supposed to be paying attention to it? And therein is my suspicion and my ambivalence. And I don't have an answer for it except that I'm kind of inherently uncomfortable with the whole premise of it. And my question moving forward is like, my suspicion and ambivalence, where does that leave me in the marketplace?
Okay, now Danah, I want you to jump in and help put. So you've had a chance to talk backstage, and just now you've heard Erin's thoughts, and can you help us put those in context? And are other artists feeling that way, and how do you react?
Well, I'm actually going to take it into a weird, different twist, which is that frequently we sort of focus on the musicians and the creators and the data as these super fans, and we talk about the relationship between these two entities without actually recognizing all of the ways and reasons in which music is consumed as a part of a cultural ethos. And so, I was thinking about it. When I was a teen girl, I thought it was really cool. I would dress up to go to the mall, which meant that I wore my backpack, which was covered with things like Bad Religion and Gwar and all of these symbols that meant something to me. And I would show up to the mall with my headphones into my Walkman, which was playing music that was far too loud so that everybody else could overhear what it was that I was listening, so I could sort of see who was sort of connecting with that. And then I would go and hang out at the Sam Goody and flip through the records, not because I actually wanted to look at those records, but I wanted to see who else was standing by those records, or I should say tapes. But I wanted to see who else was sort of standing by there. And it was all of these cultural markers, which now we think of in terms of data. Right? We think of in terms of data as it relates to these entities who own the music. Whereas what I was really doing was performing a whole set of cues and markers as it related to the people in my community that I wanted to identify with. I wanted people to overhear what I was looking at and be like, yeah, right on. And I wanted to find a way to connect with different people. What I'm seeing of today's young people is that they're doing the same thing that I was doing, except they're doing it in a digital environment. What that means is that they're taking song lyrics and they're posting them to Facebook, not so that the companies can know that they're seeing their song lyrics spread throughout Facebook, but so that they can make cultural references to their peers. They're putting songs as backdrops to YouTube videos, not because they're actually trying to create a mashup or trying to make meaning, but they're trying to actually do something that's referential and within their community. So what does it mean that this is now data that can be monetized, right? The ways in which it becomes a YouTube video that is reproducing a song by an EMI artist that therefore has to have a decision about whether or not it is to be removed or whether or not it is to be advertised against. And all of this is sort of failing to recognize the ways in which the technology doesn't just change the relationship, and the data of the technology doesn't just change the relationship between musicians and their fans, but the ways in which it's changing all of the dynamics between people as they use it as cultural currency, but the ways in which it becomes monetized against in entirely new ways. Because I don't know how I would have felt if every time somebody saw me with my Bad Religion sticker, somebody from the whatever label owned that would come up to me and tell me about the next artist that I should listen to. That would have been creepy.
But it wouldn't be creepy if it was some, like cute dude who walked up to you and was like, "Oh, you like Bad Religion? Do you?" And then you start having a conversation, and that person turns you on to a bunch of other good music.
Right, but as long as that the cute dude would also go home with me, right? Like, let's be honest.
As long as you didn't have a clipboard.
I mean, part of it is realizing.
I think the corporations who are using this music also want to fuck you.
I think that's the quote of the conference. Let's pause while everyone tweets that.
Tim Quirk, ladies and gentlemen. Good night. All right. So.
Wow, where do you go from there? I don't.
No, I'm gonna take us from that very exciting place. Everyone's very excited to somewhere really boring. I want to talk about intellectual property and be a real drag. No, it's interesting, right? Because the other side of this cultural currency that Danah's talking about, and versus monetization, one thing that's required for monetization is propertization. Someone's got to own it. Someone's got to own the Bad Religion trademark. Someone's got to own the copyrighted music, and so that's another side of that. So, is this an issue of black or white? Is this an issue of these things shouldn't be licensable or propertizable, if that's a word, or should there be some kind of negotiation where there's some kind of way that artists are compensated when pieces of music are used? Like Fred von Lohman talked this morning about how he enjoys, finds the YouTube solution favorable, that they're sharing revenue generated from the ads that sit next to YouTube videos that have Erin's music or anyone else's music next to the video that someone else has created. He finds that to be a fair compromise. That people can use YouTube and money's going to the artists. What do you guys think about that?
Pass right now. I'm going to listen to what other people have to say.
It's interesting. Andres Monroy Hernandez, who is a PhD student at MIT's Media Lab, he interviewed a whole slew of 8 to 14-year-olds this summer about how they understood credit and ownership when they themselves were part of the making of the objects. So it was a combination of making of music and having music remixed, making code and having that remixed, and it was very much in the context of remix. And he found something really interesting in this dynamic. He found that, one, kids care deeply about credit, right? And they hate it when it's automatically generated. So one of the things he thought was really fascinating is that one of the programs he looked at automatically generated and recognized that it came from a particular place and gave credit automatically. That didn't count as credit. Kids wouldn't recognize it as credit. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting from his work was he found that there was no expectation of credit or identification when everybody knew what the reference was because it was obvious. So for example, there was no point in crediting Pac-Man because everybody knew it was Pac-Man. But you had to credit something that was much smaller and locally recognizable. And this actually played out in music too. If it was somebody from your streets that you knew that was playing that song, you had to make certain that you gave them a lot of credit because nobody else would know as it spread. But if it was Eminem, everybody knew exactly who Eminem was. So there wasn't even the need to even cite that it was from Eminem because it was assumed. And so one of the things I think that we've got in flux around a lot of intellectual property and a lot of sort of monetization as it relates to it is the ways in which there's an assumed recognition and the ways in which you have to make it more explicit. And I'm really seeing this with young people as they're coming of age and dealing with this in a much more complex way than I think people give credit to young people for, because they do want credit, and they believe credit, by the way, is the most important. It's far more important than money in their world, except for the moment when somebody else starts to make money off of it. And that's another really interesting twist. When somebody else is making money off of their art, then they're pissed. But as long as everybody's just making it and spreading it and it's part of the sort of cool cultural ethos, no problem. So I think that part of it is to see where these turns are and go and what it means to then layer monetization on top of it, which a lot of these technologies do automatically, which will complicate this in new ways as well.
Erin, are you ready to react now, or should I come to someone else?
Well, I'll be totally honest. I'm sort of listening here, and I'm just kind of listening to this and respecting and as an artist, I'm like, well, what am I doing here? What am I doing at this conversation? I'm just being honest. I just feel this need to protect my fans. I feel this need to protect my fans because one of my values is that, like, I don't get the card at the supermarket for the coupons because I don't want the supermarket knowing what I bought every week. I just don't. That's a really honest, like, value of mine. And I feel the same way about my fans. I remember there was a promotion on Facebook, or maybe it was Citibank was doing something on Facebook, and they were trying to give away $5,000 to these organizations who got the most Facebook likes. So there's a girls' rock camp that I work with, and they decided they wanted to enter into the Citibank promotion. So they're asking everybody that they know to use their whole Facebook networks to like and pass on this thing. And I go and click on it to check it out, and it requires personal information to Citibank. Sorry, I love the Girls Rock Camp, but I'm not gonna send that to my 3,500 fans on Facebook. I don't feel good about that. Where does that leave me in this discussion? So I know it's very super important, but like as an artist, it's like, one of my values is that I don't want to be tracked.
I'd say it puts you right in the middle of this discussion. I mean, I think that what you just said is probably one of the core issues that every artist faces, and that is that at a certain point, the respect that's born of intimacy with a fan base. When you go to a family reunion or you meet with a group of friends, you know every single one of them. You know a lot about them. You greet them personally and you throw your arms around them. But when you go to a larger gathering of people, sometimes you run into that person whose name you know you should know, and I've met her before, but I can't quite place her. And people who are really good at that, right? People who are very highly effective in that way, they use all these cheats, right? They use mnemonics, or they go to the FMC website and they look through the program and try to put the face with the name. I know you're doing it. But that is actually genuinely born out of a desire to respect those more tenuous relationships as the circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so one effective way that I think artists are now starting to use information about fans, to give one example, is that they're using that information so as not to, let's say, spam their fans, right? So you start to know enough about them to know, okay, I'm not going to email all 3,500 or 35,000 or 350,000 people all the time. I'm going to start to know a little bit about these people, remember some things about these people, and I'm going to treat them a little more kindly as a result. But you're cheating, right? You're employing like scalable resources. You're employing, MailChimp instead of your own close relationship with fans. And so I think that authenticity and that sort of, that protectionist notion that you have about your fans is really important. And when you feel it starting to be wrested away from you, it is a real inflection point for an artist. I mean, you don't ever want to get into the business of treating your fans badly. And that's where tools start to come in, and they are only what you make of them and what your intentions are to your fans.
Yeah, I also think, a lot of times the sort of the default assumption when we start talking about this sort of data, is particularly in relation to personal privacy, is that we're thinking of it only as a marketing tool and only for business needs. I think as artists, there's a whole bunch of creative uses of information that's out there. I don't do it a lot, but from time to time I go on Last.fm and I will just look at what the crazy super diehard fans are listening to. And I mean, Jay and I have this side project called Wonderlick, and we just give away our music. We put it up on the web, and every time we record a new song, we give away free MP3s, and it's really weird to me watching which ones sort of get returned to and listened over and over again and shared, and which ones just sort of die. And it's not, I'd be looking at it like, really, they didn't like that song. Why didn't they like that song? I don't spend too much time obsessing about it, but it is this weird new set of information that I didn't have before. And it doesn't really change, it doesn't affect us when we're writing our next song or recording it, but it's just this odd shit that you can know now.
I do want to add that, we originally started talking about, or at least in the program, it's also in the synopsis, about sort of the old system. Like, we're kind of agreeing the old system didn't work. Well, SoundScan drove me crazy. It drove me crazy as an artist. Like, you don't know, how can you look at my SoundScans and know the full range of my career, and especially when piracy began to be a part of that. And so there was a time where I wouldn't get a gig or I wouldn't get an opening spot because my scans didn't reflect it. Okay, I get it. Like, I agree, and I think we all kind of agree that we're in a somewhat better system now that is more nuanced. But sometimes I think there's still the same problem of using this data to make assumptions about artists and their careers that is in the same way problematic.
Eric, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's defining success, going back to the earlier conversation, by the numbers, right? And we were talking in the green room about how, there sure wouldn't be Joni Mitchell, not by any of these stats, right? Not by this social imperative that artists have. And I think that's one real disservice that at this moment, I'm not too concerned about this because these things come and go, these memes, so quickly. But at this particular moment, we're making artists feel as if it's actually more important to pretend, to fake it, and participate in these social media than it is important to make great art. And when I get asked to participate in things like this, it's sometimes with the expectation that I'm going to tell artists how to spend a lot of time poring over data in order to make something magical happen. And my candid advice to them, I would polish that song a little more, right? I would spend more time in the rehearsal space. I would spend more time in the process of creating the art than poring over these numbers, because I think the one is useless without the other. And there are artists who will never be convincing in any of those online contexts because they don't value it, they don't enjoy it, it's not real. And so I think we're pretending like there's only one mode right now, or one mold for an artist, and it means that you should be desperately insecure about all of these numbers and be on top of all these things all the time and be awake 20 hours a day just watching the matrix flow by on some monitor. And it's just a lie. It's just a lie that we're telling at this moment.
But I also think we're colliding different kinds of numbers, right? There's the numbers that you find really useful for you as a band, where it's just like it's about seeing what's going on in the audience. Some of it is just curiosity. I mean, anybody who's ever hosted a website is just curious, right? Like, what happens? What doesn't? Wow, people are awake at 3 a.m. Who are they? Right? Like, there's a lot of curiosity that's there. But there's the other moment in which the artist gets used by entities who want to monetize the artist, which is a different way in which the data gets used and messes with things. And it's interesting that part of what is shifting is we're shifting from a very hierarchical top-down enterprise to something that's a lot more networked and a lot more niche. And in some ways, there's interesting lessons to be learned from institutions that were even more sort of hierarchical and top-down. So I think about what happened with TV. In the TV industry, talk about numbers being everything, right? Because this is a broadcast medium. And one of the best examples that comes out of this is actually from, 1994, sometime around that, when 2 TV shows came out hitting the top of the line for sort of the best possible TV shows that season. They were called My So-Called Life and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They hit at the top of the levels with My So-Called Life ranking higher than Buffy. So My So-Called Life got the better position of ABC, and Buffy got the sort of crappier one at CW at the time. What happened was that these went out into the marketplace, and both hit their target demographic with unbelievable precision. People were ecstatic. It was primarily young women, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But ABC was like, we can't sustain this if nobody else is actually playing it. My So-Called Life was a 1 season, and that was it, done. Buffy, of course, turned on to be a whole amazing franchise, was what happened. So what we see is this weird ways of hierarchical rankings that have happened in other media. And I think one of the challenges is, as we're also going through this data transition, is what does data look like when we're talking about niche and networks? Right? What does it mean to not just be popular amongst, say 3,000 people, but 3,000 tightly knit people who are constantly coming together? Is that more or less important than, like, how much is about the numbers? How much of it is about the density within particular dynamics? And I think the fact of the matter is no one knows, and we're throwing these numbers up as though they mean something without actually investigating what's actually behind the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there was so I'm reminded of, this, I think in last week's New Yorker, there was this Malcolm Gladwell article about, is Facebook useful for activism? And he says, no, Facebook isn't about strong ties that you need for activism, it's about these weak ties. And I think that fits in a little bit with your
Although I think he's dead wrong.
Yeah, and I think most of the internet jumped all over him pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm gonna defend him a little bit. I think he told the story of the 4 men at the lunch counter at North Carolina A&T, went to Greensboro, and they had known each other since high school and had these strong committed ties, and they were 2 pairs of roommates in college. And that isn't the same as the story in Clay Shirky's book of, like, someone got their phone back.
Okay, so I have no problem with the critique of Clay Shirky on this one, but the fact is that people use social media to connect to their strong ties. And I think that a lot of that is missed. We assume that this is highly networked, loose ties everywhere. And certainly for a lot of artists, it is sort of these loose ties. But for a lot of average people, they're using social media to connect to the people that they see every day. And what you see in terms of activism that's going on there on social media is it's not about using it as a broadcast media. And it fails continuously as a broadcast media. And I think that anybody who sees it as the thing that was going to overturn, Iran, it was just like, oh, please, can we not go down that path? But when we see local campus politics, and we see people really rise up and organize around their campuses, that is all strong tie local. And I think we really have to acknowledge the ways in which it gets leveraged as a utility around strong tie local. The fact that we aren't yet in a place of complete desperation as a society to rise up is a different issue. But it's nothing to do with the technology.
Oh, no, that's fair. No, but see, it just gets to your point. You have to differentiate. What kind of tie is it that you're talking about, right? I completely agree with that.
And so what kind of tie does an artist have to their fan? You know what I'm saying? Is where does an artist-fan relationship fit into this? And for me, like, I'm not a sociologist. I never heard about strong ties, weak ties, anything until I read that Gladwell article. But I knew there's something in there that's relevant to me as an artist, like reading that article. So let's talk about that. Where does the artist-fan relationship fit into that structure?
Actually, so You just made me think of something, this weird experience I had the other day that made me question some of this stuff. Too Much Joy has always had a very close relationship with its fans, and this was in the pre-internet days. So when I get Facebook requests from people that I don't know, I just assume they're a fan and I accept it. And that's cool. But every once in a while, I'll be on Facebook, and that little window in the bottom will come up, and somebody that I don't know is trying to chat with me, and they're just like, "Hi, Tim." That pisses me off. I was like, that to me is crossing a line, and I get really mad at these people. It's like, how could you do that? I'd never do that.
That specific thing happened to me. I had to create a Facebook profile in order to create a Facebook page. That was the way it was set up, and honestly, I didn't even understand the difference. I was just trying to get it set up because everyone said I had to. Okay, so then the chat thing would be on, and someone I didn't know would come in and talk to me, and I would not, whatever the button says. I have my Facebook set in pirate speak, so it just says, which is possible. I think it just says "R," so you just press R button, and you don't talk to them anymore. But I feel bad about that.
Yeah,
I do. But it's part of it is my thing of not understanding the settings of Facebook and the privacy of it. And then the other thing is my sort of indignation, which is like yours, which is like, wait, I don't know you.
So there's a concept that's really important here. It's called parasocial relations. And the idea is that I can obsessively know everything about your life as a fan of yours without you having to know that I exist at all. And what ends up happening in terms of tie strength and a lot of these other dynamics is that I feel super close to you because I'm in love with your music. I've listened to every song, I've read every interview, I'm obsessing, right? And you don't know that I've existed. And so there's this tie differential. What happens with a lot of social media is that it tries to equalize these and say, hey, we can create it as we're friends. So it tries to put us on an even keel and says that, like, I'm equally as close to you as you are to me, and I have the ability to reach out to you because I can feel much closer without all of these barriers. And I think one of the big challenges, especially for artists, is that, sure, the Justin Timberlakes have had a whole slew of management for years separating them between fans and allowing them to appear authentic, to maintain this parasociality. But for a smaller artist, they don't have those boundaries. They don't have the people who are managing them in that particular way. And so then they have to actually deal with the everyday dynamics of this, not just on the street, but even in their homes through social media. And there's no doubt that this is complicating all of the ways in which you get to react, because if you sort of blow them off, right, you're just like, you're a snob, you're a bitch.
I feel awful about it.
And you feel awful, right? And it's a really sticky thing because these people think they're in your lives. They think they know everything about you. And it's not a manageable relationship.
I think the person that told you that you had to do that just did you a terrible disservice. I think that was wrong. I think that if you don't even care about it, if you don't know what it is, then to be told, well, you've got to get on there and love it and figure it out and make it work for you is just terrible advice. And I think it's the advice that almost every artist gets.
But Eric, wouldn't not being on Facebook hurt Erin on the ultimate chart?
No, absolutely not.
Not necessarily. So explain why not.
Okay, so the reason why not is that the notion of these lists or charts, right, used to be based on how much money you made, what you sold. What we're trying to do now is find as many different ways in which artists relate to fans and look at what they're achieving in a quantitative sense within those categories. That can be one category. You can be a YouTube artist. You could be a MySpace artist. You could be a touring artist that doesn't really have any particular interest in social media, but those are all now distinct categories and people can cut across them, right? So this whole notion of you have to participate in this, this, and this because these are the three things that the charts tell you matter, I think that's really antiquated. And I think telling an artist that you have to do something as a forced march that is not in your heart can have disastrous results. I mean, I was talking to a manager on Friday at another gathering who said he tried to make his artist do it because everybody said, oh, you have to do it, you have to do it. And the artist did and participated, and he said, it was so horrible. It was so horrible because he didn't understand it. He didn't do it well. He actually alienated a lot of his fans. And what did they do? They sort of unceremoniously dumped it. They just disappeared all these social media profiles, which again is horrible, right? Now the artist is just like packed up and left. So I think that, you know how to relate to your fans better than the person who gives you that advice.
Maybe some of my fans don't like computers. Do you know what I mean? Like it seems like a wider range of people and relationship with like the fan. I mean, I adore the people that pay attention to my music. I respect them. I do want to know them. I definitely understand this doesn't happen without them. You know, the interactions that we do have. You know, someone knows I'm a sports fan and wants to tell me like about this awesome antiquated baseball scoreboard from 1912. Like, that's great. I mean, how else can I have that relationship without all this coloring of the social media? So, I mean, that's essentially my question about it.
But unfortunately, I actually disagree with you, and I would love to be able to agree with you. And I say this also as somebody who's spent a lot of time dragging Erin into technology, kicking and screaming, for a long time.
Come clean.
We were roommates in college, so it's been a long time.
Oh, sorry, that's a failure of disclosure by the moderator.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But one of the things, I would love for Erin to not have to participate in Facebook. And I would love for it to be, you know, sort of a matter of simple choice. But the fact is that when a fan base is in a particular space of social media, and then the music is part of the cultural currency, and we have an environment where labels are saying this is allowed or not allowed, the artist almost has to be there putting up certain material that can flow and be spread, and can be spread as part of the cultural currency, because otherwise they become removed from the cultural currency. And I don't like it. It's not ideal. And I think that it's really hard for artists who do not want to be really intimate with their fans. But I think that they do, in many ways, have to put up things like the events of when something is happening, simply so other people can like it and spread it and invite others. And it's not ideal. And I think that it's a really difficult space that we're in right now. But I think opting out of Facebook right now is like opting out of Ticketmaster. It automatically means you have to give up certain venues, you have to give up certain kinds of ways in which you can sell tickets. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't succeed tremendously well without Ticketmaster. And, you know, bless them to those that have done that and made a really important political stand. But I think that there's something to really account for, that this is not just about a marketing or a fan relationship, but a certain kind of currency that becomes really important
But
right
you don't,
now.
I mean, the thing is, it doesn't have to be the artist. Like, you know, I met Jack Johnson's ghost tweeter. You know,
Yeah, she's just saying that personally she doesn't want to do it and have to chat with someone who just sort of invades her living room. And I think those are
that's
two
totally
totally
fair.
different things. I mean, putting the media into the stream, of course. I mean, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want it to be there. But if you don't want to be there, if you're not comfortable there, then you shouldn't be.
Isn't there a judgment that goes with that, though? Didn't we just have a judgment about Jack Johnson's ghost tweeter? As funny as that was, like, does that say something about who Jack Johnson is as an artist?
I think so, yeah. That's why I shared that very damning piece of information. I'm doing my part to end the Jack Johnson phenomenon. I've been trying for years and failing.
I want to, so we heard from the NEA earlier, the head of the NEA earlier today, and I thought it was a really interesting speech.
I have to say I missed it because I was live on Facebook.
So right, benefits and costs with the social media, I gotcha. One of the things that the NEA used to do that it stopped doing in 1994 when the Gingrich Congress came in was they used to collect data on how musicians make money. It was a database that would, you know, and they would do these kind of labor market studies of where, you know, how are musicians making their money, who's a part-time musician, who's a full-time musician, and that information, it doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for the last 16 years. No one knows, right? So we have these conversations about, oh, you can make your money on tour. Oh, sure, I heard that 75% of people's revenue is on tour, and people are making those numbers up, right? So what I want to ask everyone on the panel is, how are we going to get there? How are we going to use all this data that's available from social media and everywhere else to a better understanding of how musicians are, what their work environment is like, how many people are working these multiple jobs, part-time jobs, how many people are able to be full-time musicians, whether touring or recordings or what kind of, like how can someone like Erin or someone like Tim, use the information that's available to to better understand their profession and understand kind of what, where the money's going to be.
Well, it's very difficult, right? Because you're talking then essentially about a kind of census data, and so you rely on what people report. And those types of self-reported survey data are influenced by so many sort of macroeconomic things. And so you get into these, these 2 points on a line where people will say, oh, the number of people who are supporting themselves as musicians is up dramatically. And really what's up dramatically is in that particular sample, the number of people who self-identified as, I am a working musician. And so that's a really thorny thing you've asked after. I mean, really getting good information about that is not easy.
When it gets, I'm sort of getting at, this is another way of getting at what you mentioned earlier, Eric, about how there's the raw data that we have that have been collected for various reasons, right? Not for this purpose, for instance, and not necessarily for the purposes that all artists are interested in. And then there's applying it and what would be useful, right? And so I wonder, I wonder about that mismatch. I don't know.
But I think truthfully, being part of an industry who's based everything on ComScore and Nielsen numbers, I think what we're going to end up seeing is a new way of making up numbers that cost a lot more to buy and look a lot more legitimate, but are as inaccurate as they ever were.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you want to elaborate on that? Why do you think? Why is that your prediction, Dana?
Oh, I mean, again, I've been living with ComScore data and just sort of banging my head against the wall at how inaccurate this material is over and over again. And when you talk to people in the tech industry, they'll sit there being like, yeah, ComScore is inaccurate, but at least it's consistently inaccurate. And you're like, great, that's just wonderful. And I feel like these numbers, when they have a purpose, when they are to hierarchically list who's the most important artist, there are always going to be politics behind what those numbers are, and the algorithms behind them are never neutral, right? Google is not neutral, right? There is nothing neutral about an algorithm. And so it's just a question of who's putting the algorithm together, why, what are they trying to achieve, and who's making money off of that algorithm. And I think when you deal with this kind of material, there's a lot of money to be made. And there's a lot of money for it to look legitimate. And so that's why we see it packaged in these clean ways that cost tens of thousands of dollars. And I think that that's where it becomes really disgusting, is because it makes it really hard to recognize the raw realities of living and breathing as these artists and how people negotiate their fans that don't come out in those clear numbers. They don't come out like that.
Yeah, I mean, do you look at any of these numbers that we've been sort of vaguely alluding to? I mean, do you track any of these things?
I'll see if I can tell you what I look at, thinking about my daily. Right now, and as I said in a panel yesterday, I stopped working with my manager. I had a manager for 10 years and another manager for another 2 years before that. So if you do the math, I had a manager since I was 20. And I just stopped working with my manager in the spring. So a lot of this work is sitting on my table right now, and I have some help from some really talented folks, and I'm moving forward knowing I'm going to need some help. But what do I look at every day? I like Twitter. I like Twitter a lot. So I look at my Twitter a lot. And yes, I could probably off the top of my head tell you how many followers I have on my Twitter. I look at Facebook less often. I use Nimbit as a platform for e-commerce and for a mailing list, and I just started doing that. So I might open up my Nimbit dashboard every day to kind of check on how that's going, and that's it.
And so just explain a little bit about what that is. So Nimbit gives you some information about the ways...
Nimbit is like a few other products that are out right now, which allows me to have the store on my website, my mailing list linked. I don't even know everything it does yet. I've just started. But those are the two main things. I was paying separately for those services, and now they're in one place. And I know there's a lot of potential there for me to understand those numbers, and I'm not quite there yet. But it is this idea of like everything in one place. And somebody buys something in my store, then they go on my mailing list, and I could probably click on their name and know a lot more about them, but that freaks me out.
Tim, what numbers would you recommend musicians be looking at that are available to them? What advice can you give?
Well, I don't know. Rather than answer that specific question, I will just tell you what I use.
Sure.
Our digital distribution is handled by IOTA, so I spend a lot of time on the IOTA dashboard, seeing what's selling where, what's being played where. It's incredibly detailed, and I mean it goes down to like, oh wow, Sprint gave us 75 cents last month. It's which song? Let me find out. So that's useful. For our direct to fan stuff, we use Topspin. They have a really helpful dashboard. I wish I'd named my band something different because I get lots of things about the Wonderlic personality test, which is not my band. But that's useful. And then, of course, just the stats for the website itself, and seeing how those things all connect is very interesting. I don't have enough time to mine the data the way I would really like to, but at least once a month I will go in and sort of do a reality check on how we're doing in all those areas.
All right, great. Well, let's take some questions from the audience. We got 15 minutes. Do we have microphones in the microphone? Someone with a microphone? Good. We're working on the microphone. Let's get this one up here. Was, I think, the first hand in the race. So. Yeah, she's on her way.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you so much. This has really been interesting. I personally am going to rename this panel for myself. Instead of Monsters of Data, I think it should be Monsters of Culture. And I'm a recovering archaeologist. I'm classically trained in archaeology. I started a recording company to create and record digital artifacts. Then I started a web company to publish digital artifacts. And then finally started an aggregator to collect the digital artifacts of other people. I think the thing for me, which is just so interesting, and so I'd be interested, this isn't a question, it's more my insight, and I'd just like to open it up for discussion. But the thing that's so interesting to me as a recovering archaeologist is basically we've made this transition into media culture from material culture. And essentially, I'm hearing the word data a lot, as almost as if it's a new thing. But their data has been around there since the beginning of time. And essentially, I think we're really talking about digital data. And for me, we have, sensory, we have eyes, ears, skin, we can feel all these things. So we already have these data points. And what I find so interesting as being sort of a new media archaeologist is Marshall McLuhan's concept of retribalization. So we're constantly looking for data from external sources to figure out where we flow and belong. And so I just think it's so fascinating to hear this discussion because I see everybody in this room kind of moving into their tribes. It's like, Facebook's kind of lame, and Facebook's great, and what is Facebook? And all these kind of tribes that either we're a part of one, we're a part of all. So I guess my main insight here is, as human beings, are we really going to a place that's more like mind-to-mind communication of data points? I want to be kind of futurist a little bit in this, just simply because we've come so far since the creation of electricity. So I wouldn't put it past us that we're able to really develop new ways to actually bring in data, just like our eyes form these things. But what do you guys feel about new media as just a bridge to get to retribalization?
Dana, we're all looking at you. It sounded like he was speaking
that
your
sounds
language.
like a Dana question.
I'm an economist. I only understood 4 words in what he said.
I think I'll take it and twist it and say, one of the things I think is really changing is it's not so much that we're dealing with digital data, it's that we're dealing with traceable and trackable data, where we can see different kinds of segmentation that we've never been able to see before as outsiders looking in. That the people who are living these experiences are in the same sort of cultural ethos that they have always been in, and the same sort of tribes as they've always been in. But we haven't, as sort of outsiders, haven't been able to look in and really see what's happening unless there's these moments of extremism. So let me sort of ground this with an example. In Bergen County in 1988, 4 kids committed suicide. And they left as their suicide note a series of lyrics from Metallica. This resulted in unbelievable amounts of Metallica-caused kids to commit suicide, which I'm sure some of you remember. What I think is really interesting, of course, is that those kids were trying to express what they were seeing through lyrics, through music. And they were trying to position themselves and their relationship to Bergen County, which at that time was in an economic crisis. What I see today is that music at this point is the same sort of role as it's always been, but it doesn't require a newspaper to cover somebody committing suicide. For us to see the ways in which lyrics are a social gel, across people, the ways in which we can see people sharing music as a part of bonding with one another. And the challenge is that people are sharing it and participating in it to exist within their tribal communities, to have some sort of relationship with each other. And we can track those as outsiders, and we think that we own and hold power over people as a result. And I think that we have to call into question what our role as observers is in this dynamic and what it means for these people who are doing what they've always been doing, scribbling lyrics on notepads, right? It's just these are digital notepads that can be looked at. And so I think that part of what's happening, the big change is not necessarily some mind-to-mind connection, so much as that we're actually able to see things in entirely new lights.
Well, actually, one thing I would say is that there's, this new data is giving us a new view of the way people interact with different types of music. And one of the things we're learning is that the tribes aren't actually, there's more crossover between the tribes than we realized before. We saw that a lot at Rhapsody. People don't just listen to one genre of music. And I mean, if you were watching the Anna Marie Cox moderated panel before, my favorite thing that I learned at Future Music Summit 2010 is that Hank Shockley listens to Barry Manilow and gets really excited when it comes up on his iPod. That is fucking great. Yeah, and Eric, I'm going to quote Eric now. Eric has this thing where he says people are not radio formats, and maybe you can pick up on that a little bit more. But people do not listen to the little boxes of music that we used to assign them to. They're all over the map, and I think that's a really good thing. And I'm glad that we're able to know that now.
It is, and I think that groups are forming around these affinities in ways that they were not able to as efficiently before internet, right? In other words, Facebook is a good example because it's been such an epic fail for me personally. I was kind of choosy about it. I was not like you. I said, okay, the people who are going to be my friends on Facebook are, as you were saying, my real friends, the people that I see every day and interact with, and I enjoy so much, and I love hearing from. And then I look at the stream of things coming from those same people, and suddenly I hate all of them. I mean, my brother, he's like, my heart and soul, and suddenly I'm like, delete. I'm just like so close to just, and I thought, why is that? And it's because he's not talking to me. He's talking to everyone or no one. He's throwing things into a stream, into a conversation, probably, aware in some corner of his mind that he's not even sure who he's talking to because it's several hundred people. So he's got to sort of sanitize. And what I realized is when I looked at this stream of data coming into my world, there were these people, very few of them, who were consistently enriching my experience, who were making my life better. They were providing great curation of content and ideas and information, and I realized there were actually 4 of them. And I didn't count any of the 4 among my good friends. And what I realized is the tribe I would really like to be a member of on Facebook is probably made up of people that I've never met. Because the people who would really do a good job providing for me in that venue are not my friends and family. They're just not. I love them, but in a totally different context.
Next question. Where we got the mic? Oh, over here. Sure.
My name is Joseph. Thank you guys so much, first and foremost, for all the information. It's been great. I kind of wanted to attach a couple of different things you guys said, starting with Jack Johnson's ghost tweeter. So we find out that Jack Johnson has a ghost tweeter, and all of a sudden we are like, that terrible man, nobody listened to his music, he's not being personal, this is Satan. And then we have Erin, who doesn't want to use Facebook. And then we also talk about something about community, where you're going to the mall as a child and or as a high schooler with all these symbols about the bands that you love. And sorry, I'm going to attach it all, I promise, and it'll turn into a question. And so you're going to the mall and you have these almost like flags on your back. This is who I listen to. This is the community that I'm a part of. Do you guys use the data that you find to reach out into your fan base and find someone who isn't a ghost tweeter, but rather one of your fans to help run a fan page, and Erin's fan page, and have these fans, because these kids in their communities, they would probably love to be like Erin's official news bringer to their town. They would, now that we have a data connection to find out where these people are you guys using this data to reach out to them and establish fan communities and fan cultures?
That's a great question. What do you guys think?
I'm just starting to do that, and I have a person that I actually am working with on that. Her name is Rachel Klein, if you want to raise her hand. She's kind of helping me start thinking that way because personally I I don't feel so comfortable doing it, but I feel really good about her ethics around it and her ideas, and so she's helping me start to think about that stuff.
I will tell an anecdote from the pre-internet days. Back in 1990 or 91, Too Much Joy played a free show at the Hat Shell in Boston. So this big crowd came out, and we had all our merch, but there was nobody to sell the merch. I forget what happened, but the person who was going to do it didn't show up. And so there was a super fan who was sort of hanging out with us, and we're like, oh, well, you want to sell our t-shirts? He was like, sure. So he sold the t-shirts. I think we made like a crazy amount of money. It was like $2,000 that day in merch sales. And he comes over to us at the end, and he's like, here, you guys made a lot of money. And we're like, oh, thanks. And he goes, why'd you trust me with it? And we were like, wow, you know, it never occurred to us that you might run away with our money because you're one of our fans. That was the relationship we had with our fans. So I just wanted to tell that story because it warms my heart. And also because I'm going to sound like an asshole next. Which is, we will use our fans, not shamelessly or mercilessly, but we will use them for anything they volunteer for. So our website, built by fans, the coding done by fans, any videos made by fans. Basically, one of the things I love about the internet days is you have ways to connect to people who want to help and want to get involved, and they don't even want money. I mean, we will send them money at the end, but it's not a requirement of getting them to do it. So I kind of love that.
So if you're loyal to Tim and you love Tim, attack the ghost of Jack Johnson on Twitter right now.
No, see, now I'm feeling guilty. I made fun of Jack Johnson.
No, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Look, I heard those weren't his real bare feet.
All right, next, let's get another question over here on this side. Fred, I'm gonna call him Fred. Sorry, Rachel. You just got a shout out. We need to get Fred in here.
Exactly. So I'm really curious what each of you thinks about advertising. Because there's been a lot of talk about Facebook, and I was talking to one of my co-panelists earlier today, and he said to me, Facebook lets me advertise targeted to only people who work in major labels. And I can target different ads to only people who work in my competitors. And I immediately thought, well, if you're an artist, boy, can Facebook only target my ads to people who work at Pitchfork? They probably can. I don't know if they do. They probably can because of knowing everything that you put on your Facebook profile. So I'm curious, how do you feel about ads in a world where artists can target people who work at Pitchfork or people at universities where I draw well, or kind of any arbitrary level of granularity? Presumably, Tim, your data providers could tell you what IP numbers are downloading your music, and you could figure out, oh, that's this university or that company or whatever it is. I mean, good, bad, inevitable, scary? What do you guys think about advertising?
For me, all of the above. You have to like the ability to target to people, to basically spend your money wisely. I got a little email from Facebook. I got 2 emails because I have 2 different band pages. They just gave me $50 of free money to go spend on Facebook ads. So I'm going to do it. I feel real, queasy and sort of creepy about it, but I'm going to do it. But I haven't made that leap yet, so I can't really speak that intelligently about it. But I'll get back to you after I spend my $50.
I think you'll get a different answer from many different artists. I mean, certainly inevitable. I'll agree with that. And then, I bet Erin has ethical concerns about that with respect to her fan base, and different artists are going to fall different places on that spectrum.
Yeah, I'm a little bit like Tim. Like, I can't quite speak. I haven't directly done a Facebook ad. I feel uncomfortable with advertising when it makes an assumption beyond the original information. I feel uncomfortable with, like, okay, so maybe I find out where people are paying attention to my music from, but for me then to decide what moisturizer they want feels uncomfortable to me. I know that's a really, like, super simplified, non-nuanced experience of it. I think this is making me think of, I'm doing this webcast. I'm working on this anniversary project, and I'm doing a webcast next week. And I have some options with webcasting, right? I could be sponsored by a company who could brand themselves all over my webcast in order to pay for it, which to me equals advertising. I could, do it to the extent of my budget and my technological limitations, which are both small. Or I could, I've made a choice to partner with a company called Webmalicious, which I met here at Future of Music last year, which is streaming this, and we're doing a profit-sharing structure in order to, without advertisement, bring an experience of a webcast to my fans.
It's one of the things that scares me about the way in which behavioral advertising is playing out in this space is where and when artists end up getting used by entities behind them to get access to a lot of private data about people for manipulation purposes. And so it's one thing for an artist themselves to be able to get access to this data, but it is amazing the amount of slippage of data, and I'm sure, Fred, you know this all too well, the amount of slippage of data that you can get from something. So you target it far enough, then that person clicks on on the advertisement, right? And it comes over to your fan page and signs up. You've now, let's say that your ad was targeted to people who made over $200,000, lived in this particular region, or any number, like had cats, or whatever random things you wanted to have. You now have this data in your database, right? And it's one thing for the small artists who probably aren't even thinking to capture this data as the cookies are coming through, but the bigger players definitely are. And the thing about it is that what's happening here is that the fans who are deeply committed to the artists are inadvertently giving over a lot of data because they're really committed to the artist, and they don't realize the amount of slippage of data that's going on. And I think that this is going to be a huge battleground in this space because what's happening in the social norms and what people think they're doing looks very different than what's happening more generally. And I think, frankly, Fred, it's your former organization that's going to be the absolute key in a lot of this and figuring out what this will look like. And I think that we're going to see a lot of different play here. But I will also say it's getting nasty, not just in the online space. I don't know how many of you followed Snooki being given a Gucci bag for Jersey Shore by a competitor, just in terms of sort of making a mess out of everything. So I think there's a lot of ways in which people are sort of manipulating the advertising space around individuals and around celebrities in ways that are sort of deeply questionable. And I think it's highly entertaining that one of the most popular TV shows right now is Mad Men, which has a really interesting historical critique of what's going on.
And I think we've all experienced it directly through Facebook Beacon. I mean, people who are not even Facebook users were aware of that, of the catastrophic fallout from Beacon. And so I think it is a slippery slope, and it is inevitable.
I think we have time for one more question. Let's get our man from Dot Music here.
Hi, this is Constantine from Dot Music. We're talking about data. I know when I was in high school, they asked me, what is the definition of data? And I always got that answer wrong. And they always told me the correct answer, what you need to do with data is turn it into meaningful information in order for you to make a decision. So everyone here is talking about stuff. So we're talking about likes. What does likes mean? Does it really mean that someone's going to buy someone's music? What does number of tweets mean? Or how many tweets you do a day, or how many Twitter fans you have? We've got over 4 million friends on MySpace. Hey, a lot of people left MySpace. They went to Facebook. What the hell happens now? So we had an underlying strategy, which was collecting emails. So we used MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, and we guided everything to our website, and we collected over 1.5 million emails. Like, we haven't launched yet, but again, we had a strategy towards what we want to do. So I guess it all depends on what your goals are as an artist, as a whatever. So some artists, let's say Rage Against the Machine, they identify with Amnesty International as a brand to sponsor them. So, creams and all these other things are different things, but again, how close is that brand to what you are and what you represent? I guess that's the whole deal. But I wanted to ask you guys, because I look at Facebook and people just tell you what they want to tell you. They don't tell you 100% the truth. So by definition, data is inaccurate because you don't know 100% what it is. So what? I mean, it's so hard to reach decision making, and I think that's the status of the music industry today, is the data is not good enough or it's inaccurate, and how do we improve that data? Thank you.
I think the first thing to keep in mind that, data is Soylent Green. It's people, right? And never forget the people. These are your fans. These are the people that love you. These are the people who are really there and supporting you. And I think part of it is this weird moment, sort of classic, with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm delighted by Angelina Jolie, again, moving a little out of music for a moment. One of the things she said was that, no matter what, cameras follow me. I don't have a choice. So I want to make sure whatever is in the background is things that people need to be hearing even when they don't think that they should be looking at it. And I think there's something really interesting. You talk about rage, having its connections with amnesty. I think part of it is that artists, because they are the target of a lot of attention, have a great opportunity to divert some of that attention and to do it responsibly. But to do it as a form of manipulation is a very different question than to make a commitment to an organization or a cause or a belief and use that sort of attention to do some sort of greater good. And I think we really have to keep that in mind as we're thinking about the data, because these are people.
Yeah, and I'd say to your point, you have to start with an objective or with a question, right? Otherwise, this is just sort of playing into some basic human psychology, some insecurity that we have that we think will be alleviated, or in your case, Tim, you were saying sometimes you even like to exacerbate it with data. Tim was saying in the green room, sometimes I feel really lousy about myself and I'm feeling really small, and so I would dig in the data, our artist data or our plays data.
I don't remember saying I feel lousy about
Actually, Tim, that was a direct quote. I'm sorry, I'm going to vouch for Eric there. That's a direct quote.
It was. You're playing rock star now out front.
No, what I was saying was, you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the way they punish criminals in that is they put you in this little machine that shows you the entire size of the universe, and then this little dot that says, this is you. And it makes you feel really, really tiny. Well, the data that I had access to at Rhapsody was basically that machine, because I could look up my exact place in the musical cosmos. And it's very humbling. Until I look at all my heroes, or not all my heroes, but several of my heroes are several rungs down from me, and then it's like, oh, maybe it's not so bad. So that was the conversation.
That machine is called the total perspective vortex.
Yes.
And it's meant to make you explode.
Yes.
Really? Until who's the one person that...
Zaphod Beeple.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Who has the largest ego of any fictional creature.
Anyway.
So did you explode?
I did. I am still here. I did not explode.
No, but anyway, you were going to say the data could be depressing, and you need to start with a question, like a productive question. Well, what is it that I'm going to use the data for?
I wasn't judging that. I'm saying if you are not seeking to affect something, right, then you're just indulging a psychological need to look at your place in the universe. But if you have an objective or a question, then you can apply information to trying to address that. And so I think one of the sort of the failures of all this information is that in and of itself, it can be useless to us. We get overwhelmed, we look at it a lot, we don't know what to do with it, and then we look at it again. And so I think part of the equation has to be first deciding what it is you want to do, and then collecting information in service of that.
All right, I think that's a great place to end. Let's thank our panel, Erin, Danah, Eric, and Tim. Thanks so much, guys.